Welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. I have the pleasure today to welcome once again Julian McGowan, renowned coach, for another episode of Coach's Corner. How are you doing, Julian?
I'm doing good. Just taking half an hour from work. Thought I'd have a nice chat to you, Bob. Then do a little bit more work. I'm probably going to head to the gym and start the weekend. And I have next week off. And it's the first full week I've had off in about 8 months. So I'm looking forward to that.
Outstanding. Well, hopefully you get good weather and you can get to do some of the things that you've been wanting to do.
Fingers crossed.
Tomorrow, as you know, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, we have the, ridiculously priced, for me, pay-per-view event headlined by Moses Itauma and Dillian Whyte. But I thought we could also spend a little bit of time today talking about the other heavyweight contest that's, in fact, it's kind of low down in the card. I think it's sort of fourth down in the card, which somewhat surprises me. And that's Filip Hrgovic and David Adeleye. What's your thinking of that fight?
It's an interesting fight. It's an interesting card. You know, I'm like yourself. I'm not being a typical tight Yorkshireman. I'm not going to fork out to pay for that bill particularly. But I'll catch the highlights at some point. But they are interesting fights. I think maybe the Hrgovic Adeleye fight's been pushed down the bill because sometimes they get the heavyweight. It's a bit lower down the bill. It gets the people in the room. It gives it a bit of a buzz, and then it maybe retains the actual live audience. Maybe that's strategic on their part. I think it's a good fight. The kind of feedback or the things that I'm hearing people talking about, thinking Hrgovic all day long. Mm-hmm. And I'm not 100% sure about that, if I'm being completely honest. David Adeleye he's got good hands. He's very talented. He's explosive, but he's also quite lazy as well. He doesn't have a great work rate. And I think that's his undoing, and that's something that will effectively hurt him and will stop him getting to that world-class, you know, in my mind, to what I call the cream of the genuine top 8 or 9 fighters in the world. I don't think he'll ever get to that point. I think Hergovic has been quite disappointing. We saw him early on when he was unbeaten, and after 6 or 7 fights, I saw a couple of his fights and they were building him up to be the next big thing. He had good pedigree. He just looked, again, completely one-paced. Very little defense whatsoever. And again, not what we thought he might be. So they're almost like the good fighters. One has more pedigree than the other. Both of them are probably a little bit disappointing what we thought they might achieve. But I think it's a relatively evenly matched fight. You know, I'm seeing the odds. I don't look at the odds, as you know, Bobby. I don't pay too much attention to that. I just go by my eyes and what I think and what I see. And it wouldn't surprise me for Adeleye to hit him that many times and to force some kind of stoppage, because he can be explosive, but he'd have to be quite calculated in doing so. He's a bit like a poor man's David Haye. You know, Haye didn't have the greatest stamina in the world, but he was explosive and he was an elite fighter, of course. But he reminds me of a poor man's David Haye. Interesting watching him work the pads with Adam Booth as well. You can see the touches that he's given him. But I think maybe his knockout of Solomon Darkers has flattered to deceive. We saw him in the fight, obviously, against Fabio Wardley, and he was well beat that night. And again, the lack of pace cost him. And I think ultimately, it's going to be a brawl.
Yeah.
Hrgovic will work hard every round, quite unspectacular looking. Adela will be looking to land big shots and working flurries and then kill the clock when the opportunity comes. But I can't see it being a particularly high-level skill fight. I think it might be entertaining in parts, and I would tentatively lean towards Hrgovic to get the win, but it might be a points job. Bob, I know when I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've seen things online, when I do have a little look online, people say, no, Adelaide's going to get destroyed. And I'm like, I don't subscribe to that, but I do think he'll get beat tomorrow.
Yeah, I think my prediction was that Hrgovic would win, but there's a possibility. You know, Hrgovic has been cut a few times, and Adelaide does have fast hands, so we might see something. Yeah. Adelaide doesn't seem to have much of a gas tank, but on the other hand, Hrgovic doesn't seem to have, a lot of stamina.
Exactly, and it can also become very tiresome getting hit, and he doesn't have a lot in the way of defence. I mean, Dubois had no problem whatsoever finding his chin repeatedly and effectively just wore him down, didn't he?
Yeah.
He took the thunder and he wore him down. Bit of a surprise result there, but I don't think the challenge I have is how up for these fights will each of those fighters get, and I think Adelaide is probably a little bit more up for the fight. Don't ask me why I think that. It's just an instinct that I get. And where does the winner even go? Because I think, as I've said at the outset, it's proven that these are not elite guys. Well, they're certainly not the kind of world championship level material. And not everybody can be, of course, but they're not potential world champions. I don't know where they would go from here. So I guess it depends on the hunger. I think when Adelaide and Wardley fought actually for a British title, I believe they got £1 million each or something, which is crazy, really. For fighters of that at that time, like novices fighting for British titles. And I don't know what kind of money these guys will be earning at the weekend, but I don't know. I question the motivation, actually. I've said this before, when people get to a certain level, I question the motivation. The fact that they fight once or twice a year never sits well with me. And I guess I like what they're doing with Ridar season, which is just putting big names together. It's an interesting fight. It's not a great fight. And I think it'll be competitive. I know I'm repeating myself. It'll be competitive, but I don't think the rest of the cream of the division won't be watching that fight on Saturday, and whoever wins, I don't think anyone will be losing any sleep over it.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think that's fair. It's hard to see either of these guys certainly breaking into the top five. I'm a little concerned about Hergovic. He never seems to be enthusiastic about a fight. I know part of that is it's sort of, his demeanor. And of course, English is not his first language, but he never seems enthusiastic. He never seems to have that hunger and I'm not sure if Abel Sanchez can infuse that hunger into him. Hergovic always seems sort of like lackadaisical, as the word is. Like he just doesn't seem enthused.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things when I first saw him. I can't remember the fight. It was like it was 6th or 7th fight. I'd heard about him being this monster, and I saw him on a big bill. It might have been. I don't need to check this. It might have been the Ruiz Joshua return fight. It might have been on that bill. It might not have been. But I just remember watching him and thinking, there's not a lot of input there. There's not a lot of, like you said, motivation. Maybe just that's him. Not a lot of passion. I like to see fighters with passion. I think that's really important. And I don't think he had that passion. But sometimes people are just good at something. They continue to do that for a big part of their life. It's the best way he can earn money. And he's been a very successful amateur and relatively successful professional, you could say, and he hasn't really won anything. But yeah, I don't see the passion. But also, because I don't follow it as closely as you guys do, but let's not forget David Adeley's. Was it the Jamie TKV fight? Was that his last?
That's right. Yeah.
And he didn't throw a punch for 6 rounds, did he? I mean, slightly controversial ending, but he looked again. He didn't look like he was exactly like burning with desire and passion, and it was terrible for the first 5 or 6 rounds of that fight. So that's why I don't think these guys are going anywhere soon, and they might actually get Moses Itauma, assuming Moses comes through Saturday. It might prove to be a nice kind of warm up for that fight.
Yeah, it's funny with Adelaide. I didn't have Adelaide winning at all against Jamie TKV, who, quite frankly, and no disrespect, but I don't think that Jamie TKV is anything really to write home about.
He's very average.
Yeah, it's sort of like a ham and egger kind of guy. Like there's nothing exciting. I tend to put Jamie TKV, Dave Allen, Johnny Fisher, Solomon Dakers, all into that sort of big bucket, I guess. And Adelaide didn't really strike me as a standout. And quite frankly, I mean, I don't know what you think about this. He could have been DQ'd against TKV because the ref said break and he punched after the ref had said break. A different ref might have said, you're done, right?
Yeah, that's it, you're done. I think there was also a slow motion that showed after a call break that Jamie TKV also let off a body shot during that exchange. So I guess one threw a better punch than the other.
Yeah,
but
I suppose so.
It was still after the referee called break. But yeah, it was a dreadful fight, a woeful fight. And without hammering Jamie TKV, I think he's like literally a novice. He's had a handful of fights. He's already got a loss on the record against an absolute journeyman. So this is not a great level. And I think that's why I just think the pedigree, I keep using the word pedigree, of Hrgovic will probably get the job done. And I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those scorecards like a 97, 94, 96, 94. That type of thing is what I expect.
From what I read, and this is, of course, the world of social media and whatever, Adela specifically chose Hrgovic, which seems it's a ballsy move, as they say. It definitely is a step up. But I guess if that's where the money is, then why not? But
yeah, I guess it's. Are you choosing somebody we've heard of, or are you choosing them because it's easier to go for that guy than to go for the other guy? Somebody else who's more of a dangerous fight. Because the one thing we know he won't have problems doing, as I said, he won't have problems finding Hrgovic's chin. And maybe with the work he's doing with his new coach, maybe he's got a real renewed enthusiasm and belief in his power, because he does have power, and maybe he thinks he just needs that one opportunity to detonate those power shots on Hrgovic's chin and he'll get the job done. But Hrgovic hasn't shown a weak chin at this point in his career.
No, he's shown an iron chin, and he's sort of now marketed as the iron-chinned kind of guy. But I also recall that Joe Joyce was thought to have an iron chin, and according to that, what was that fellow, Sam Jones, he had a thicker bone structure or something. Well, once he got cracked, he then became rather vulnerable. So iron chins, they don't seem to last forever. It seems to me,
not unless you're, Randall Tex Cobb. Yeah.
It seems to me to be an unwise decision to rely upon your chin to stop punches, because eventually that's sort of like one of those self-correcting errors.
Yeah, a little bit of head movement doesn't harm anybody, does it? We were actually, I'm coaching again, and I was coaching with some of the fighters last night at the gym, and I was showing them some Canelo moves, because if you're going to watch anybody, you watch the guys who can, good defensive guys, but the guys who can also defend on the spot, and I think it's a part of boxing that some guys just bypass completely. They get fit, they get strong, they learn the offense, they work on the pads, they look explosive. But when it comes to actually practicing head movement non-stop, it's something that you rarely see. I know Usyk's a master, but we saw with the Dubois rematch, didn't we? I mean, he has got zero head movement, Daniel Dubois. Tyson Fury, we keep getting told, had a fantastic defense, but I think he was just gangly and awkward and tall, and he'd get away from the majority of shots, but he certainly got dropped enough times to not, he wasn't the most greatest defensive fighter, that we've seen for a while, and it's just something it doesn't seem to be taught that much. The old masters at heavyweight used to teach it, and we don't see that. Emmanuel Stewart always went for that safety. I know we're kind of moving on now, but Emmanuel Stewart would go to that safety first approach when he got hold of Vladimir Klitschko, for example, because he'd been stopped a couple of times and needed a fantastic way of getting him to use his reach and to use his leverage and to neutralize people. But it's not something that we see, and I don't think we'll see any defense on Saturday whatsoever. I think it'll be exciting in parts.
Yeah, it seems that heavyweights they focus on, their big guns, and much less on defense. Like if you look at the lighter weights, you got a guy like Shakur Stevenson, like he's impossible to hit. So if you can have a heavyweight,
I talk about this stuff all night. That's yeah. Sorry, Bob, we have a delay. Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, like I like to see a fighter who's really hard to hit, right? I mean, because they can make their opponents, quite frankly, look really average. And I wonder why it's not taught more at heavyweight.
I just don't know. I remember I'm going to sound like I'm name dropping now, but I used to, when I was on Facebook, pretty much not on social media now. I just have a tiny Instagram account, and I come on here sometimes, and that is it. I'm done. But I used to go on social media and Facebook Live and various things with a friend of mine. I used to interview fighters, and we used to interview some pretty good level fighters from the 80s, because of course I'm an 80s nut. And one of the people who we once interviewed, Ben and I, was Tim Witherspoon.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
Tim Witherspoon was such a smart, clever, cagey fighter. And I always would say when I've trained many heavyweights, but I've trained a couple of bigger lads, and I'd always say, heavyweights don't defend like lighter weight fighters do, which is based a lot more on reflexes. But there are smart things you can learn as a bigger fighter. Like I say, you're never going to be Willie Pep. It's not going to happen. But there are certain things you can do. And Witherspoon was very cagey. And whilst it might not have been a great fight, I remember when Tim Witherspoon and Greg Page and Tim Witherspoon, Pinkham Thomas, those title fights. It was just brilliant watching them jab, block, slip, parry,
Yeah.
and then tie up inside. Fighters don't seem to be able to tie up inside whatsoever. I mean, we've seen Anthony Joshua panic as soon as he starts to get tired. And there was just an era of kind of like 80s heavyweights, which might not have been the greatest set of heavyweights other than, Holmes and Tyson, but they were very, very good at smothering work. And it's
Yeah.
interesting we're talking about that, because that's the approach that I think Dillian Whyte should adopt on Saturday. And sometimes you have to learn to defend outside, but also be really, really comfortable defending inside. And again, I'm going back 40 years, but I remember Witherspoon in several fights, and the fight he had with Tony Tubbs, which wasn't a memorable fight, by the way, but the defensive work was brilliant. They were both inside. They put the chin on the outside shoulder, the little pivot, they almost like the James Toney shoulder, the sneaky little uppercuts, the touches underneath. We never see that now at heavyweight. Though even Usyk is effectively a master from a specific range.
Yes.
You'll never see Usyk defend pocket and smothering in the pocket and pivoting somebody on the outside. You'll never see those things from Usyk. And I always wonder when we'll see that kind of. It's an interesting one, my eyes always light up when I talk about this stuff, but I always wonder when we'll see that kind of quality from heavyweights, or if we ever will again. And it just brought back a memory talking to Tim Witherspoon, and he was talking about, the techniques that he would use and things he would use to be comfortable in a ring. And that might sound alien to most people. How can you be comfortable when someone's trying to knock you out? And you can actually be very, very comfortable in a ring. And it comes from having confidence in your balance, but having confidence in your defensive prowess. And I don't know now. I think ever since we mentioned Klitschko and Emmanuel Stewart, ever since we got to that kind of the American heavyweights phasing out, more European heavyweights coming in and being more dominant, we stopped seeing that Riddick Bowe type of fluidity, but guys who could fight and defend inside. I'll stop, Bob, because I will talk.
No, absolutely, no. It's massively interesting. I don't think we're going to see. You mentioned that's what Dillian Whyte has to do, and maybe this is a suitable time to transition to Dillian Whyte. Though Dillian Whyte is no Tim Witherspoon. How do you see the Itauma Whyte thing going? Whyte seems to be in lean shape, though I notice he seems to be walking a little flat-footed with his left foot. I'm wondering if that's some sort of injury, or is he just trying to psych out the pundits? How do you see this fight going?
So I'll talk more about the fight, and I don't like to be controversial. It's never been my style. I am wondering how he's got into such shape at a stage of his career, certainly for someone who's got a checkered history with positive tests, albeit some of those were explained. I am wondering, when I see a fighter in later years suddenly look different, very, very different, and leaner. I'm like, that automatically just rings alarm bells for me. But put that to one side. We make an assumption. What I'm saying is just, a little bit of paranoia, and he's 100% clean.
Mm-hmm.
Inactivity is a curse. It's a similar type of fight, and people don't jump on me, anybody, when I say it's a similar type of fight to when Mike Tyson fought Jesse Ferguson. But Tyson, you remember, was ripping through everybody in the early days, tomato cans effectively. And then they gave him before he fought Tillis and Mitch Blood Green, they gave him a half step up against Jesse the Boogeyman Ferguson, who was a kind of perennial heavyweight. I know Dillian Whyte's been ranked higher than Ferguson ever was, but such as the alphabet boys today, that's what you would get. But for me, this feels very much like Mike Tyson against Jesse Ferguson. A little bit more resistance, a name that we recognise. There'll be more of a test for him, and it might require him to take his time a little bit more. But I don't see it as being too much of a stern test, simply because it's the age thing, it's the lack of activity thing, and it's the momentum thing. I think if Dillian Whyte is smart, he'll smother, he'll swarm, he'll push Moses back up onto the ropes. The little naughties with his shoulders, with the heads. He'll just mess him around for two or three rounds and see if he can get some traction and build on that. But ultimately, that's what he has to do quite early on. He has to shut down Moses Itauma, because once you give Moses the space, we talked before about the technical brilliance of Moses, actually. Once you give him that space, you give him time to get his shots off. He's so sharp with either hand. It's a solid jab. It's a really ferocious backhand. It can go straight through the middle. It can go over the top. It can go underneath. Unlike many southpaws, he's also got a really dangerous short right hook. Generally southpaws tend to favour the backhand only. Certainly at heavyweight division. Usyk's a genius. He doesn't have much of a right hook, in the way that Larry Holmes didn't have much of a left hook. It's like, even great fighters have limited tools. They're just unbelievable what they do with the tools they've got. So I think Moses offensively is an absolute nightmare for Dillian Whyte. But I do think, having said, the things that are painting quite a grim picture, and you might think this is sounding like an early bath for Dillian Whyte, I do think he'll have some success. I think he'll be motivated to some extent, that I'm not just going to lie down and take the money. The fact that he has got himself in shape tells me that he's thinking, look, this is one last roll of the dice. But youth generally wins, and I think we'll see an interesting first 3 or 4 rounds. Again, Whyte will try and push him back on the ropes. He'll try and just maul him. He'll grab hold of him. He'll rabbit punch him. Moses will be letting the shots go, but Whyte can be caught.
Yes,
he's been caught. He's been caught up the middle as well. Ben Davison will be all over this. We saw Tyson, obviously different type of fighter, but Tyson knocked him out with a right uppercut. Povetkin knocked him out with a left uppercut, so he's very, very vulnerable through the middle. Moses has a beautiful left uppercut. It's a thing of beauty, so he's going to be looking for that shot very, very early, and he just needs a 1-round job wouldn't surprise me. That is definitely beyond, within the capabilities of Moses Itauma to do that. I think we might see 6 or 7 rounds, and I think there'll be a stoppage, but it'll be relatively interesting, if not life and death.
I'd like to see it go at least 5 or 6 rounds. I think in my prediction, I predicted Moses Itauma to win in round 4. I'd like it to go further. Personally, I'd like to see Dillian really, really test him, because then we would be provided with more answers. If it's a 1 or 2 round blowout, honestly, that doesn't really tell me anything other than, okay, well, yes, he's devastating in the offense. So as a fan, I'd like more information available to me, and 6 or 7 rounds would give me that information, especially if Moses has to weather a little bit of a storm, then I could be more comfortable in finally assessing where Moses is at. At the moment, I see tons of promise, but I need to see him tested.
Yeah, I mean, I really rate him. I'm not getting too giddy just yet because we've been here so many times, haven't we? With fighters across all weight divisions. They've been knocking everybody out, looking fantastic. And we just don't know enough, do we? Because he was a world junior champion. He's only ever boxed as a junior, as an amateur. And of course, he's not really fought anybody who's got too much pedigree in the pros, as you'd expect. There's a lot of things we don't know. There's a heck of a lot of things we don't know. I suspect he's got a strong chin, the way he's built, the way he's thick set. I suspect he's got heart. And I think he's probably as good as we think he is. But there's still that 5% that we're like, you know what, just let's have some caution. But I think he'll get the rounds in. He'll be impressive. He'll be tested, but not hurt. I think there's a difference. I think he'll be pushed. Yeah. He'll have a few things to figure out, and the corner will have a few things to figure out. But I think it'd be Dillian Whyte's lack of youth, his lack of ring time activity, and the fact that he's getting hit very sharply, which will probably end in a corner retirement after six, 7 rounds. That's how I see it going.
That seems to be a very reasonable sort of assessment there. I've been reading, of course, and this is predicated on, let's assume that Usyk relinquishes the WBO belt or is stripped of it. There's talk then that Itauma would be number 1 and he would fight the interim champion, Joseph Parker. How would you, as somebody who, likes Moses and sees lots in Moses, how would you see a Parker Itauma fight going? Because I would imagine that Parker would be a very stern test.
Well, Parker's one of those fighters who's a 7 across the board, isn't he?
Yeah.
And that's always a very capable fighter. Might not be the best in the division, but he'll give problems to anybody who thinks that they are. And you know me, I wanted to see Moses perhaps have 2 or 3 years before. Well, put him in when he's ready.
Mm-hmm.
That would be right now. That'd be a very dangerous fight. If Moses, assuming he comes through on Saturday, irrespective of if it's a 1-round job or if it's a struggle, irrespective of that, I think at this stage of their careers, I would probably make Joseph Parker a slight favourite in that fight. And I think Moses Itauma is a better fighter potentially, but this is a guy who's had 20-odd rounds of action, and you can have as much sparring as you like, but it's not true ring craft and experience, and he hasn't got the years. And you've heard me before say, why rush him? Because once you're up there, then you're up there.
Yeah, you can't go back. Yeah,
you can't go back. But it's a very different world to the world that I kind of watch fighters in, and when I've worked with fighters myself, how you develop them. It's a very different world because it's a fast food, instant world we live in now. Everybody wants everything now, and everybody wants to see Moses win world titles now, and to have the record's going to go, but to certainly be the youngest British fighter to ever win a world title, heavyweight. And people are looking for the records. People are looking for him to move quickly. And if he's been offered massive money to take fights like Parker,
yes,
and potentially Usyk before he's ready, who are we to say you can't have 25 million, Moses? And no, not at all. These would be like, well, I think I'm good enough, and even if I'm not good enough, I'm going to get 25 million. But if I'm not good enough and I don't step up and I fight someone much lesser than Joseph Parker, then I won't make 25 million. And that's the bit that I've always struggled with, because I know boxing's business. It's such a cliche when people say boxing is a business, but I also think it's a sport as well.
Yes,
but it really is now just a business. It's purely just a business.
So I've often
said that fight will be based on business.
I've often said on this channel, it's a business, it's an entertainment, and it's a sport. And sadly, the sport seems to be by the wayside. I noticed that we're coming up to our hard stop, and you have to go back to work. So thank you so much for coming on at short notice and sharing your thoughts with us. And I look forward to maybe catching up with you in a week or so, and we can have a debrief on how these things go.
And thank you, Bob. And I won't mention names, but good luck with a very special guest you've got coming on.
Okay. Thank you, my friend. Cheers.
All the best.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.